And welcome back to part 2 of the Scribing trilogy, and in this video we take a look at scribing face frames and learn that it's all about the offset. That's coming up next. Yes, of course, you're absolutely right. It is always about the offset, whether it's an infill or a face frame like today. But in yesterday's video, or last week's video as we call it, we brought the, when we were doing the infill between the cabinet carcass and the wall, we brought that forwards to the inside edge of the cabinet, of the carcass, and then we used an offcut of the carcass thickness material to give us our scribe line by running that down the wall. We don't really have that luxury when we're doing a face frame, especially one like this, where we want this to sit and finish absolutely flush with the inside of the cabinet. So what we're going to do is bring that forwards by a set amount, and I'm actually just using some little 18mm blocks to do that. We'll bring that forwards by a set amount, and then we'll use that block to scribe our line. Before we do that, we want to make sure that this face frame, it's called a face frame because it sits onto the face of the cabinet instead of going between the cabinet and the wall. We want to make sure that that face frame is wide enough but not too wide, and to do that, just as we did before, we want to find the narrowest part of this wall, and we just simply take a measurement, but bearing not against the carcass inside itself, but against the little offset block that we're going to use. And just as before, we'll use a combination square, a sliding square, and that gives us a reading of a hair over 70mm. So we'll be able to trim our face frame down to 70mm, get the offset in place, and then do our scribe line. So with the minimum size calculated, we can transfer that directly to our face frame and trim that down with the trachsel. So with the offset blocks temporarily fixed onto the face frame with double-sided tape, we can offer the whole thing up against the cabinet, against the inside edge of the carcass, and just hold it in place with some masking tape. And with everything fixed in place, we can scribe our cut line just as we did with the infill, but this time using a scrap of material the same thickness as our offset. Okay, so that's a familiar shape. The advantages of putting these on with double-sided, of course, is they just come off, which makes making the scribe much easier when you don't have these little sort of legs, these little feet on. I think what I'm going to do with this one, obviously in the previous video I did all these scribes with the jigsaw with sort of, you know, modicum of success. I think with this one I'm going to take off the bulk of the waste with the trachsel and then see if I can plane these other little bits out. I'll either try a hand plane or electric plane. But to make that initial cut, I'm going to put a slight bevel on it, because then you get a thinner section at the top, and that makes it easier to plane. So there's less material to take away when you're actually doing that scribe. So let's do that. Okay, that was reasonably successful. You see what I mean about less material to take away when you've got a bevel cut like that. You're only actually taking away this initial little bit here. It's just an easier scribe to make when you're making that cut. So we'll see how we get on. I'll try with a hand plane to start with and see how we do with that. And then we'll take it from there. I'm using the smallest block plane I have with the shortest sole plate, but even so it's really hard to get close to the line even when planing at an angle. So yeah, as I said in yesterday's video, and as I said earlier I think, getting into these tighter little scoops and whirls like this is really hard with a hand plane. Obviously there's a very good reason why guys who do this for a living all day long use the jigsaw method. I can't physically get the plane into there to get that scoop out, so as I've started down this path, I've got to finish it off with a rasp, which is what I'm going to do now. I'll get as close to that line as I can, and then just keep offering it up and seeing how close I can get it, and then probably finish it with a little bit of sandpaper. Maybe I might have to actually dig out the belt sander and see if we need to finish it off with that. Okay, well that's not so bad. A few plane related little bits of lumpiness in there. As I say, you just can't get a plane in there tightly enough to get those scoops out, as I've mentioned before, but the rasp did a really good job actually. Surprised how cleanly that came out. Would probably be a different situation if that was a pre-painted piece. But anyway, you can, as I said earlier on, you can see why the guys who do this for a living use a jigsaw. But yeah, I mean, that's basically that for the face frame that's flush to the inside of the cabinet. What do you do with one that overhangs slightly? Well, you do the same thing again, but with a little bit more offset, and that's what we're going to do now. Try and do our best to see if we can get that scribe absolutely right before we finish today. Okay, so with this face frame, we want it to overhang the carcass by an arbitrary amount. Again, the specific amount is entirely up to you. I'm going to use 18mm because I happen to have a piece of 18mm offcut, piece of scrap here. So we're going to pop that in. That's where we want the inside edge of our face frame to come. So now we have our offset. We're going to use another piece of 18mm for that. And then we're just going to measure again what the minimum distance is. Then we can trim our face frame back to that. And I'm fairly sure this is going to be around about 70mm plus 18, which is, yeah, what do you know, almost dead on 90. So what we'll do, we'll trim our face frame piece back to 90mm. Then we can offer that up, do the scribe mark as before, make a bevel cut, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do, what I'm going to use to make that scribe. I really do want to get one as close as possible. But let's get on with that. We'll get that trimmed back, then we'll make that scribe line. Alrighty, so that's taped in place. We've used both little 18mm blocks to get that in the right place. That's the 18mm in that we wanted and the 18mm offset, and then we're just going to use one of the 18mm offsets to scribe the line, and that whole thing will shift back 18mm, and that'll all work out nice. So we'll carry on, scribe our line just with a single offcut, single 18mm block, and then we can cut that scribe. Again, I'm getting familiar with that shape, you know. As before, we'll trim this back with a 15-degree bevel cut on the trachsel, and then we'll try and figure out the best way to take out those scoops as neatly as we can. And as the rasp was so successful last time, I'm trying it again, creeping carefully up to, but hopefully not over, the scribe line. Anxious not to take this one too far. I really want to get one that's reasonably close at least. So there we are, one of the best scribes I've done over the last couple of days, and it's a product of a rasp and a little block of wood. I guess it goes to show that all you need more than anything is practice. Fairly obviously I could hog out the bulk of the waste on that scribe at a 15-degree bevel with a trachsel, because it is particularly flat between the lumpy bits because it's man-made, and obviously you don't always get the luxury of that when you're out on an actual install, when you're out on site, which is why the bulk of the guys who do this for a living, who do this day in, day out installing, will be using a jigsaw. And frequently they'll be using something called a Collins coping foot as well on that jigsaw, which allows you to put that bevel, that back bevel, on the scribe as you're cutting it. It's quite a specialist piece of kit, and I think you do need to dedicate a jigsaw to it. So it's the kind of thing that it's only the kind of thing you'll have if you do this a lot. I certainly don't do anything like enough installations to justify that, and I certainly won't be doing that many going forwards either. But that's it for this particular video. I'm not getting into how you fit the face frames particularly, because there are loads of videos about that. There are many ways in which to fit a face frame onto a cabinet or carcass like this. Biscuits through the carcass itself, dominoes, dowels, the lamello springy things, the tensos, pocket holes. You could even, if If they're not pre-finished, you could even just pin these through, fill the holes and paint them yourself. Depends entirely on the type of job that you're doing. But that's it for the fitting of face frames, both flush with the camera net and overhanging slightly for this video. Be sure to join me in part 3 of the video series when I talk about doing the slightly extreme ceiling scribes. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.